Back in medieval times, strange and creepy things were just part of daily life. What feels weird or scary to us today was completely normal for them. So let's dive into some of those creepy habits people didn't even think twice about. In medieval times, when evidence was scarce, people turned to a justice system that would make modern lawyers faint. Trial by ordeal. The basic concept? If you're innocent, God will protect you from horrific pain. If guilty, well, tough luck. The most common ordeal was the hot iron test. Accused people carried a red-hot iron bar for 9 feet. Their hands were bandaged and checked 3 days later. Clean wounds meant innocence. God had intervened to heal you. Infected wounds? Guilty. That's right, in the medieval times, having good hygiene and a strong immune system basically made you a criminal. The water ordeal involved being tied up and tossed into a lake. Floating meant guilt. The pure water was rejecting your sinful body. Sinking meant innocence. Talk about a lose-lose situation. Good news, you're innocent. Bad news, we might not fish you out in time. For the hot water ordeal, you'd plunge your arm into a boiling cauldron to retrieve a stone. A town record from 1133 mentions a man whose arm was boiled to the bone but was still found guilty because the wounds festered with corruption just as his soul. The most elaborate ordeal was trial by combat, literally fighting your accuser to the death. God would supposedly strengthen the innocent party's arm. A court document describes 2 elderly farmers dueling over land, both so feeble that the combat lasted until the judges grew bored and declared a draw at sunset. These bizarre tests were conducted with complete seriousness until the Fourth Lateran Council banned clergy from participating in 1215, which eventually led to their decline. For hundreds of years, your innocence depended not on facts or witnesses, but on how quickly your burns healed or whether you sank or swam. Justice wasn't blind. It was just really bizarre. While trials by ordeal tested individuals, sometimes entire communities faced strange phenomena that tested their sanity. Imagine your entire town suddenly breaking into an uncontrollable dance party. Not for hours, but for days or even weeks. People danced until their feet bled, some dancing until they died, and nobody could stop. Welcome to one of history's strangest phenomena, the dancing plagues of medieval Europe. The most famous outbreak hit Strasbourg in July 1518. It began with one woman, Frau Trophea, who stepped into the street and started dancing. Within a week, 34 others had joined her. Within a month, about 400 people were dancing day and night. These weren't your typical dance enthusiasts. No one was yelling, "Encore!" They were screaming in pain and begging for help while their bodies refused to stop moving. Chronicles from the Strasbourg City Council describe dancers continuing day and night with barely any rest until they collapsed. Medical records indicate many suffered heart attacks, strokes, and exhaustion. Even more shocking, the death toll from this dancing marathon reached into the dozens. What did local authorities do to handle this crisis? In what might be history's worst medical advice, they encouraged more dancing. That's like trying to cure someone's alcohol poisoning by opening another bottle of vodka. They built special stages and even hired professional musicians to play for the dancers, believing the afflicted would eventually dance the mania out of their systems. This wasn't the only dancing outbreak. Similar incidents occurred in dozens of towns across Europe. In 1374, dancing mania struck communities along the Rhine River, affecting thousands. A chronicle from the Abbey of Cologne describes dancers who hopped and leaped with wild shrieks, oblivious to the world around them, until they collapsed in exhaustion. So what caused these bizarre dance marathons? The most scientific explanation is ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on rye grain and contains chemicals similar to LSD. In years with wet springs and summers, like 1518, it thrived in grain supplies. Medieval bread that makes you hallucinate? That's one way to spice up a boring meal. Other theories include mass psychogenic illness, essentially a stress-induced collective hysteria. The 16th century was a rough time in Strasbourg with famine, disease, and extreme poverty. Whatever the cause, the dancing plagues remain one of history's most bizarre mass events. The last major outbreak occurred in the mid-17th century, and then they mysteriously stopped. Today, neurologists study these events as fascinating examples of how the human mind and body can malfunction on a massive scale. These involuntary dancers weren't the only ones performing in medieval town squares. Sometimes there were other unusual participants in public spectacles. A few months ago, I had no idea what a health ring even was until my fiancée got me one, and I have to say, I'm shocked this isn't a widely known and used product. It tracks my stress levels, and what I found out is that some supplements made my stress score spike, while others actually helped bring it down. I adjusted a few things based on that, and honestly, I feel 10 years younger. My wife mainly uses it to track her menstrual cycles, and she is obsessed with her sleep quality score. I noticed they are currently running a limited 69% discount, but I don't know how long it will last. It's currently only $60, and it's clear. This one is the best bang for your buck, with other health rings priced around $350 with less functions. They managed to price it this low because they cut out the middleman like Amazon, Walmart, etc., who drive up the price and take a big margin, ending up with the customer paying 3 to 5 times more. If you are on TV, you can check it out yourself by pausing the video and scanning the QR code with your phone camera or clicking the first link in the description of this video. Medieval legal systems had a peculiar approach to justice that extended beyond humans. They regularly put animals on trial, complete with lawyers, witnesses, and formal court proceedings. Far from being considered jokes, these trials were taken extremely seriously, sometimes lasting longer than human trials. Pigs were the most commonly prosecuted animals, probably because they roamed freely in medieval towns and could be dangerous. Court records from the 14th to 16th centuries document over 85 formal trials of pigs, with charges ranging from damaging property to, most seriously, injuring or killing children. Turns out this little piggy went to market, this little piggy stayed home, was missing, this little piggy got a court-appointed attorney. The trials followed proper legal procedure. A 1,386 case from Falaise, France, included court transcripts showing the pig was given a formal defense lawyer who argued that the animal couldn't comprehend human laws. That's basically the medieval version of the "my client is a hamanal, not a criminal" defense. The church's involvement made these proceedings even more bizarre. Religious authorities treated animals as if they had moral agency and could deliberately sin. This view was widely accepted, leading to animals being excommunicated or even anathematized, which is formally cursed by the church. Sometimes the stakes were incredibly high. In Switzerland in 1474, a rooster was put on trial for the unnatural crime of laying an egg. The court determined this was obviously the work of Satan, as roosters cannot lay eggs. The poor bird was burned at the stake along with its demonic egg. That's taking free range to a whole new level. Free range of motion straight to the execution site. The trial of the beetles of St. Julien shows how elaborate these proceedings could become. When beetles destroyed local vineyards, the insects were summoned to court through an official proclamation posted on infested vines. When shockingly no beetles appeared for their court date, the judge appointed a lawyer to represent them. The defense argued that God had created the beetles and given them the right to eat plants, so they couldn't be punished for doing what they were made to do. Not all animals received harsh punishments. A 16th century French case involving a female donkey accused of participating in an unnatural act resulted in acquittal after villagers testified to the animal's good character and virtuous behavior. The court records note that the donkey was known in the village as a most honest creature of clean habits and blameless life. The practice wasn't limited to farm animals. Rats were put on trial in several documented cases. In one famous 16th century trial, the rats of Autun, France, were summoned to court for destroying barley crops. When they failed to appear, their court-appointed lawyer argued they couldn't attend because the town's cats made travel too dangerous. He successfully petitioned for a continuance. These animal trials finally declined in the 18th century as Enlightenment thinking took hold. Yet for hundreds of years, they represented how differently medieval people understood the relationship between humans, animals, the law, and sin. While animals were receiving their day in court, humans were having very different social gatherings in places that combined cleanliness with a surprising lack of hygiene. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people did actually bathe. They just did it in ways that would horrify modern health inspectors. Communal bathhouses were extremely popular across medieval Europe, but these weren't exactly the relaxing spa experiences we might imagine. Picture this: large wooden tubs filled with water where men, women, and sometimes children all bathed together, often completely naked. It was basically a hot tub party where nobody bothered to send invitations. Everyone was welcome, regardless of hygiene level. Bathhouse regulations from the 15th century Germany revealed that the same water would be used for days at a time, with maybe a bit of fresh water added occasionally to warm it up. A city ordinance from Nuremberg in 1467 required bathhouse operators to change the water at least once per fortnight, suggesting that 2-week-old bath water was considered acceptable. Medieval medical texts contain warnings about the miasma rising from shared waters, but these concerns were largely ignored. With dozens or even hundreds of people using the same bath water, it became a perfect breeding ground for disease. It was basically human soup, with everyone contributing to the broth. The social aspect of bathhouses can't be overstated. They were community hubs where people gossiped, conducted business, and even celebrated special occasions. Town records from several European cities mention bath days associated with weddings, baptisms, and guild initiations. A German town's chronicle describes a guild celebration where 48 tanners shared the bath, drinking beer while soaking for hours. Many bathhouses also doubled as brothels with bath attendants, offering services beyond just scrubbing your back. "Come for the cleanliness, stay for the company" could have been their motto, though the cleanliness part was questionable at best. City council minutes from multiple towns show ongoing struggles to regulate this aspect of bathhouse culture. A 1410 ordinance from a French town required bathhouses to display either a red or white flag, red indicating that services beyond bathing were available, white meaning bathing only. Historical records show most displayed red flags. The health consequences were predictable and severe. Medical texts from the period describe various bathhouse diseases that spread rapidly among patrons. A physician's journal from 1485 attributes outbreaks of burning rash on the privy parts directly to bathhouse attendants. Despite these risks, bathhouses remained extremely popular until the late 16th century, when syphilis outbreaks across Europe finally made people reconsider the wisdom of communal bathing. As bathhouses declined, Europeans increasingly moved toward the dry cleaning method of using perfumes and changing linens rather than actual bathing. Ironically, this led to the stereotype of the unwashed medieval peasant. But the truth is, they did bathe, just in conditions that were often worse than not bathing at all. While communal bathhouses were places of social gathering and questionable hygiene, medieval town squares sometimes hosted spectacles of a much darker nature. Medieval justice wasn't just harsh, it was theatrical and designed to shock. Nowhere was this more evident than in the punishments for bestiality, which turned into elaborate public spectacles that modern people would find utterly bizarre. When someone was accused of bestiality in medieval times, the animal involved was also considered guilty and contaminated. This led to one of the strangest legal practices in history. Both human and animal would be tried together and, if found guilty, executed together. Medieval justice was so thorough it made sure to punish all parties involved, even if one of them was literally a mindless animal. Court records contain hundreds of documented cases. A particularly detailed account from 1546 in Falaise, France, describes a man found guilty of relations with a female pig. The court sentenced both to death, and town financial records show payments for special gallows constructed to hang both man and sow together. What made these executions even more bizarre was the practice of dressing the animals in human clothing before the execution. The same Falaise record includes an expense entry for garments for the sow, including trousers, jacket, and white gloves. That's right, they put pants on a pig before killing it. Talk about adding insult to injury. A Swiss court document from 1474 notes that a convicted cow was dressed in a smock with ribbons in her hair as though a maiden going to her wedding before being hanged alongside her human partner in crime. The document includes a detailed itemized bill for the cow's outfit, which cost nearly as much as the executioner's fee. Why dress animals in human clothing? Religious authorities argued it elevated the animal from its natural state, acknowledging that it had been corrupted by human sin and was therefore partly responsible. A theological treatise from 1435 explains that by dressing the beast as human, we recognize the human sinfulness it has absorbed through its unnatural Congress. These executions were massive public events that drew enormous crowds. Town squares would fill with spectators hours before the scheduled time. Vendors would sell food and drinks, creating an almost festival-like atmosphere. It was like a medieval version of a drive-in movie, except infinitely more disturbing and with much worse snacks. Children were brought to witness these spectacles as moral lessons. A town magistrate's diary from 1483 mentions bringing his 8-year-old son to watch a bestiality execution, noting that the boy was suitably horrified and will surely remember the wages of such depravity. The execution methods varied, but were uniformly brutal. Hanging was common for both person and animal. Sometimes they would be hanged from the same gallows, the animal first and then the person. Other times, they would be burned together at the stake. After the execution, both human and animal bodies would typically be burned to ashes to symbolically purify the community. The ashes would then be scattered in a river or buried in unconsecrated ground, often with salt mixed in to prevent anything from growing there. As strange as these animal-human executions were, they weren't the only way medieval justice involved unusual treatment of bodies. Some legal proceedings focused less on the living. When most people die, that's the end of their legal troubles. But in medieval times, death wasn't always enough to escape the law. In one of history's strangest legal practices, corpses were sometimes dug up and put on trial in elaborate court proceedings called posthumous trials. These macabre legal spectacles weren't just whispered myths, they were well-documented official proceedings. Court records describe hundreds of cases where dead bodies were exhumed, brought to court, and formally tried for various crimes. Talk about being tried by a jury of your peers, except you're the only one who's no longer breathing. Perhaps the most famous posthumous trial was that of Pope Formosus in 897 CE, known as the Cadaver Synod. The newly elected Pope Stephen VI hated his predecessor, so he ordered Formosus's 9-month-old corpse to be dug up, dressed in papal robes, and propped up on a throne in the papal court. Church chronicles describe how for hours Stephen screamed questions at the rotting corpse while a deacon hid behind the throne and answered in a falsetto voice, pretending to be Formosus. That's what you call a real skeleton crew running the defense. The dead pope was found guilty of perjury and illegally obtaining the papal throne. His 3 fingers used for blessings were chopped off, all his papal decrees were invalidated, his papal garments were torn off, and his corpse was thrown into the Tiber River. Amongst chronicle records that later the body washed ashore and supposedly began performing miracles, leading to Stephen's overthrow and eventual murder. But it wasn't just high-profile figures who faced posthumous justice. Common people accused of heresy, witchcraft, or major property crimes might find themselves on trial long after they were buried. Court officials, medical examiners, and religious figures would gather at the cemetery, often in the middle of the night, to avoid public attention. They would dig up the body, which might have been buried for months or even years. A court record from 1447 France meticulously describes a disinterred corpse as green-black in color, with some flesh still adhering to the face and hands, giving off a powerful stench that caused several witnesses to vomit. The court would assign a defender of the dead, usually a reluctant lawyer or priest forced to represent the corpse. These defenders often complained about their assignments, with one French lawyer in 1485 petitioning unsuccessfully to be released from defending the putrid remains of the heretic Marcel. If found guilty, the corpses faced various punishments. They might be publicly executed again, hanging a body that was already dead. They might be burned, dismembered, or subjected to other physical punishments. Property confiscation was common, which explains why many posthumous trials happened. They were a way for authorities to legally seize the estates of wealthy people who had died. A town financial record from 1462 shows that after a posthumous trial found a wealthy merchant guilty of heresy, the town's income increased by nearly 15% that year due to the confiscation of his property. Medieval governments basically invented ghost taxes, making even the dead pay their dues. The smell must have been unbearable. Court records occasionally mention special arrangements made due to the stench. Windows would be opened, perfume cloths provided to attendees, and in some cases, trials would be moved outdoors when the smell became too overpowering. Posthumous trials began to decline in the 16th century as legal systems modernized, but amazingly, they continued in some places until the 18th century. The last major posthumous trial in Europe was in 1761, when the corpse of a French man was dug up and tried for blasphemy. While we might find posthumous trials ridiculous today, they reveal how differently medieval people understood death, justice, and the relationship between body and soul. And speaking of remains, medieval people found plenty of creative ways to repurpose something once all the legal proceedings were finished. In our world of IKEA furniture and Amazon home decor, it's hard to imagine decorating your space with actual human remains. Yet for medieval people, human bones weren't just for burial. They were prime decorating material, religious symbols, and even souvenirs. After major wars, plagues, or when cemeteries became overcrowded, bones would often be dug up and repurposed rather than reburied. What followed was an architectural and decorative tradition that would make modern interior designers faint. Perhaps the most spectacular example is the Sedlec ossuary in the Czech Republic, commonly known as the Bone Church. Following the Black Death and Hussite Wars, this small chapel was decorated with the remains of an estimated 40,000 to 70,000 people. Talk about recycling. These folks took reduce, reuse, recycle to an entirely new level. The church includes a chandelier containing at least one of every bone in the human body, garlands of skulls decorating the ceiling, and coat of arms of local noble families recreated entirely in human bone. A visitor's account from 1511 describes being struck silent with wonder at the artistry made from the remains of those claimed by plague. This wasn't just a Czech phenomenon. Throughout Europe, charnel houses displayed bones in elaborate arrangements. A French bishop's report from 1443 describes a parish ossuary where skulls are stacked in patterns of crosses and flowers, with long bones arranged like the rays of the sun, creating a most impressive and holy sight. For the truly devoted bone enthusiast, nothing beat owning a personal piece of someone else. Taking bones as souvenirs became surprisingly common, especially from battlefields and execution sites. It was the medieval equivalent of a gift shop. Thanks for visiting the 100 Years' War. Don't forget to grab a femur on your way out. Court records from 1468 mention a man arrested for selling finger bones of executed thieves as lucky charms. The magistrate notes with disgust that he had sold over 30 such bones in the market square before being apprehended. Battlefields were particularly popular bone hunting grounds. Chronicles describe how, after major battles, local people would search among the dead for souvenirs. A French account of the aftermath of the Battle of Agincourt in 1415 mentions peasants coming with sacks to collect teeth and finger bones from the English dead, believing they had special powers. This grisly souvenir hunting became so common that it created a thriving fake relic industry. A merchant's trial record from 1482 reveals he had been selling skull fragments of St. Martin that were actually pig bones bleached and aged to look ancient. The original fake merchandise business, no, trust me, this is definitely St. Peter's toe bone and not from the pig I ate last week. Grave robbing evolved from occasional theft to a professional occupation. Cemetery records from multiple European cities mention the need for guards specifically to prevent bone theft. A London church ledger from 1521 includes regular payments to a night watchman to deter those who would plunder our graves for bones. The trade in human remains became so widespread that by the 16th century, cities began passing laws against it. A Venetian ordinance from 1531 threatened severe punishment for any person caught removing bones from the graves of the city, whether for sale, collection, or magical purpose. The practice began to decline in the 18th and 19th centuries as attitudes toward death and human remains shifted. Modern cemetery regulations and changing religious views eventually pushed bone decoration and collection to the fringes, though some of the grand bone churches remain as tourist attractions today. These medieval bone decorations serve as a reminder of how differently our ancestors viewed death, not as something to be hidden away and forgotten, but as a constant presence worthy of artistic celebration and even home decor.